By the time the sun cleared the jagged Arizona hills, the trail already felt familiar beneath his shoes. This was supposed to be an easy run. One last controlled effort before the semester's workload tightened its grip. He had run this route dozens of times, sometimes faster, sometimes longer, always alone. Solitude was part of the discipline. No music, no distractions. Just breath, footfall, and thought. He checked his watch out of habit rather than necessity. Pace steady. Heart rate calm. The desert stretched ahead in muted browns and pale greens, quiet except for the wind slipping through scrub and stone. The air smelled dry, clean, almost comforting. It was early enough to avoid the worst of the heat, or so he believed. Experience had taught him confidence. Confidence, he assumed, was preparation. He thought about classes, about an upcoming meet, about how running had become the one place where everything made sense. Out here, effort equaled outcome. Push harder, get stronger. Slow down, recover. The rules were simple. That simplicity followed him deeper along the trail, mile after mile, as campus life faded behind low ridges and empty land. At a fork he barely noticed, he chose left without stopping. He had done it before. At least, he thought he had. The trail narrowed slightly, gravel giving way to packed sand, footprints faint but present. Someone had passed through recently. That reassured him more than it should have. He adjusted his stride and kept moving, convinced the route would loop back the way it always did. The sun climbed higher. Sweat gathered at his temples, trickling down his neck. He reached for his bottle and took a long drink, then another. Plenty left, he told himself. Enough for the way back. He reminded himself this was just training, not a test. Still, a quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. These were the miles that separated serious runners from casual ones. The ones you finished when no one was watching. The desert seemed wider now. Landmarks felt less distinct, hills blending into one another. He slowed slightly, scanning ahead, expecting a familiar bend or marker to appear. It didn't. Instead, the trail thinned again, veering toward a shallow wash where the ground dipped and rose unevenly. He hesitated, just for a second, then pushed forward. Turning back felt unnecessary, almost foolish. His watch buzzed, signaling the mile. He glanced down, half smiling. Last easy mile, he thought. One more before heading home. He didn't notice how quiet everything had become, or how the wind had shifted. He only knew the rhythm, the belief that control still belonged to him. Behind him, the trail faded faster than he realized. Ahead, it stretched on, empty and indifferent, carrying him farther into a place that did not know his name, or care that he was there. The first concern arrived quietly, without panic or urgency. It came in the form of a glance at a phone, then another. He was usually back by now. Not late enough to worry, just late enough to notice. The morning continued its normal rhythm around campus, unaware that a small expectation had gone unmet somewhere beyond the desert hills. Messages were sent casually at first. A short check-in. Then a second, phrased lightly, as if humor could keep worry from taking shape. No reply followed. The trail he ran had poor reception, everyone knew that. Silence was normal. That explanation worked for a while, resting uneasily but not yet cracking. By midday, the sun climbed high and unforgiving. The casual explanations began to thin. A missed class turned into a missed lunch, then an unanswered call. The space he occupied in other people's thoughts grew heavier, darker. Someone mentioned the heat. Someone else mentioned the distance he sometimes pushed himself. No one said the word missing. Not yet. Out on the trail, he slowed to a walk. The confidence from earlier had evaporated, replaced by calculation. He stopped, turned slowly in a full circle, scanning the land. Every direction looked wrong in a different way. The hills no longer matched memory. The wash twisted farther than expected, splitting into shallow channels that erased footprints almost as soon as they were made. He checked his watch again, this time for direction rather than pace. GPS lagged, then froze. He tapped the screen harder than necessary, as if force could summon signal from empty air. When nothing changed, He exhaled sharply and slid the watch back onto his wrist. A mistake, he told himself. A small one. Turn around. Follow the wash back. Simple. But the wash didn't answer back. Each step sent loose sand shifting underfoot, blurring where he had already been. The trail he thought he recognized dissolved into guesswork. He climbed a low rise, searching for the familiar bend, the marker, anything that felt known. There was only distance, stretching in layered silence. Back on campus, unease hardened into decision. A description was repeated aloud, then written down. Height. Shoes. Route. The normal details suddenly felt fragile, insufficient. Someone suggested waiting a little longer. Someone else shook their head. The desert did not forgive delays. He sat beneath a sparse mesquite, chest rising too fast for the slow pace he kept. His mouth felt thick, his tongue dry despite careful sips from the bottle. He rationed without meaning to, instincts shifting quietly. The sun pressed down, relentless and personal, as if aware of him now. He called out once, then again, his voice sounding smaller than expected. The sound traveled briefly, then vanished. No echo. No answer. Only wind, moving through brush like something breathing. A realization settled in, heavier than fear. No one knew exactly where he was anymore. Not really. The trail had taken that from him, piece by piece, until all that remained was effort and uncertainty. As afternoon crept toward evening, shadows stretched longer, cooler, deceptive. He stood, choosing a direction with less confidence than before, telling himself movement meant progress. Somewhere behind him, concern was turning into alarm. Somewhere ahead, the desert waited, patient and unreadable, as night began quietly preparing its claim. The sun no longer felt like part of the landscape. It felt intentional. It followed him as he moved, pressing down through the thin shade, draining strength with every step. What had been a manageable warmth hours earlier had sharpened into something aggressive. The desert shimmered, edges blurring, distances stretching beyond reason. He told himself to stay calm. Panic burned energy faster than motion ever could. He adjusted his pace, slowing to conserve what little remained. His breaths came shallow now, measured, as if rationing air itself. Sweat no longer cooled him. It simply soaked his clothes, trapping heat against his skin. When he checked his bottle, the water level startled him. Less than half. He tried not to think about how far half might need to go. He climbed another rise, hoping for perspective, for something familiar to anchor him. Instead, the view widened cruelly. Hills layered into the distance, indistinguishable and unhelpful. The wash branched again, spidering outward in shallow veins. He chose one without real reasoning, driven by the instinct to keep moving, to outrun the creeping thought that stopping might mean never starting again. His legs began to protest, not with sharp pain but with a dull heaviness that spread upward. Every step felt borrowed. He focused on form, the way coaches had drilled into him. Relaxed shoulders. Light feet. Efficient movement. Discipline had carried him through exhaustion before. This was just another threshold, he insisted, another place where the body argued and the mind decided. But the mind was faltering. His thoughts looped, circling the same questions without resolution. Had he passed that rock already? Was the sun higher or lower than before? He caught himself checking his watch repeatedly, even though it no longer told him anything useful. Time felt warped, slipping faster than expected, dragging slower than feared. When dizziness crept in, he stopped fighting it and sat down hard in the shade of a low outcrop. The rock radiated heat, but it blocked the sun. He pressed his palms into the sand, grounding himself. Drink slowly, he reminded himself. He tipped the bottle, counting swallows. 3. Then he stopped, screwing the cap back on with shaking fingers. Rest helped less than he hoped. Standing again sent a wave of nausea rolling through him, sharp and sudden. He steadied himself, eyes closed, breathing until the world stopped tilting. This was wrong. He knew that now. The desert was no longer a backdrop. It was the central problem. He faced a choice, though it didn't feel like one. Continue forward and hope the wash led somewhere recognizable, or turn back toward a direction that no longer made sense. Pride whispered that forward motion was progress. Fear whispered that every step was another mistake. He listened to neither, trapped instead by momentum. He chose forward. The decision felt small at the moment, almost automatic. He told himself he would reassess soon, just over the next rise, just a little farther. The sun dipped slightly, casting longer shadows that offered brief relief. He mistook that shift for mercy rather than warning. As he moved deeper into unfamiliar ground, the desert grew quieter. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if listening. He did not notice the subtle changes underfoot, the scuffed earth near brush lines, the faint disturbances in sand that did not match his own steps. By the time he realized the heat was no longer the only danger, the day was already slipping away. The bad decision had been made, sealed not by panic, but by exhaustion and belief. Ahead, the light thinned. Behind him, the path back dissolved completely. And somewhere in the cooling air, unseen and patient, the desert prepared to show him what truly lived there after dark. The light thinned faster than he expected, draining color from the desert in uneven waves. What had been brown and green flattened into gray, then deepened toward black. Shadows pooled between rocks and brush, stretching longer than the objects that cast them. He slowed, not from fatigue alone now, but from instinct. Darkness changed rules he understood too well. He stopped moving before the sun fully disappeared. Running blind was an invitation to injury, and injury out here would be final. He searched for shelter with growing urgency, scanning the ground for anything that might offer protection. A fallen tree lay half buried in sand nearby, its roots exposed like ribs. It wasn't much, but it broke the wind and narrowed the space around him. He crouched beneath it, pulling his knees close to his chest. The temperature dropped quickly. Heat bled out of the land as if released all at once, replaced by a sharp chill that bit through sweat-soaked fabric. His body began to shake, not violently, but persistently. He wrapped his arms tighter around himself, teeth clenching, breaths shallow and uneven. The desert had taken everything from him in stages. Now it asked for warmth. Sounds emerged as sight disappeared. A rustle here. A scrape there. Each noise felt closer than it was, amplified by fear and exhaustion. He tried to catalog them logically. Wind through brush. Small animals moving at dusk. Nothing unusual. Still, his heart refused to slow. It hammered against his ribs, loud enough that he wondered if something else could hear it. He checked his bottle again, though he already knew the answer. Almost empty. He resisted the urge to drink, swallowing instead, his throat burning. Tomorrow, he told himself. Just make it to morning. The thought anchored him briefly, a thin thread of hope woven through dread. He tried to sleep. His eyes closed, then snapped open at every imagined sound. The ground beneath him felt alive, shifting subtly as the night settled. He became acutely aware of his vulnerability, of how small he was without motion, without daylight. Out here, stillness didn't mean safety. It meant exposure. Back beyond the hills, concern had hardened into action. Names were spoken with urgency now. A route was retraced, then retraced again. Flashlights cut through gathering darkness in widening arcs. The desert, however, absorbed the light greedily, offering little back. Night had arrived there too, indifferent to human worry. Under the fallen tree, his thoughts turned inward, spiraling. He replayed the day in fragments, searching for the moment he could have turned back. The fork. The wash. The hill. Each memory carried regret, heavy and useless. He felt tears well, surprised by them, embarrassed even though no one could see. He wiped them away quickly, as if weakness might invite something worse. A sudden sound snapped him upright. Not wind. Not small. A low movement through brush, deliberate and slow. He held his breath, straining to listen. The sound passed, then stopped. Silence followed, deeper than before. His pulse roared in his ears. He stayed perfectly still, muscles aching from tension. Minutes stretched, then hours, indistinguishable in the dark. Whatever had moved did not return, or perhaps he simply failed to hear it again. He did not know which possibility frightened him more. When the moon rose faintly, it offered little comfort. Pale light revealed outlines but not certainty. Shapes shifted as his eyes adjusted, tricks of contrast and fatigue. He stared into the darkness until his vision blurred, refusing sleep despite exhaustion. Night had claimed him fully now. No one was looking. No one could see how fear wrapped itself tighter with every passing moment. As the hours dragged on, the desert breathed around him, alive with unseen movement. Somewhere beyond the edge of his fragile shelter, tracks formed in the sand, unnoticed in the dark, waiting for daylight to reveal what had passed dangerously close. Morning arrived without warmth. Light crept slowly across the desert floor, pale and deceptive, revealing nothing of the mercy he had hoped for. He stirred beneath the fallen tree, joints stiff, muscles aching as if he had run through the night instead of lying awake within it. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then the dryness in his mouth and the vast silence reminded him. He pushed himself upright carefully, scanning the area before moving. The world looked different in daylight. The ground was scuffed and uneven, marked by his own restless movements from the night before. Sand clung to his skin and clothes. When he reached for the bottle, he hesitated, then forced himself to take a single swallow. It barely helped. Standing revealed the damage. His legs trembled under his weight, calves tight, feet sore from hours without rest. Still, daylight meant options. Visibility meant hope. He stepped out from the shelter, blinking against the brightness, and froze. The sand near the brush was disturbed. At first, it registered only as irregular texture, patches where the surface looked brushed smooth, then broken again. He crouched slowly, ignoring the protest in his knees. The marks weren't his. They were too wide, too deliberate. Long impressions pressed into the ground, partially erased by wind but unmistakably purposeful. A chill ran through him despite the rising sun. He straightened and backed away instinctively, heart pounding. His mind raced through explanations, searching for something ordinary. A deer. A large dog. Anything that belonged closer to safety than he did. But none of those fit what he was seeing. The desert had been active while he lay beneath the tree, unaware. He moved carefully now, choosing each step with precision. The signs appeared again farther out, near a line of rocks. Scratches on the ground. Flattened grass. Not a trail exactly, but evidence of passage. He swallowed hard, suddenly conscious of how exposed he was, how visible his movement must be in the open light. Miles away, searchers widened their grid. The heat returned early, already pressing down as boots crossed sand and scrub. They found the runner's last confirmed footprint near the wash, then nothing for a long stretch. The desert resisted their presence, erasing clues with wind and time. Still, subtle changes drew attention. Disturbed earth. Broken stems. Signs that someone had moved through recently. Out in the open, he stopped again, scanning the horizon. He felt watched without seeing anything watching him. The sensation crawled along his spine, impossible to ignore. He adjusted his plan without admitting it to himself. No straight lines. No unnecessary noise. He kept closer to brush, pausing often, listening. Thirst sharpened his thoughts cruelly. Every decision felt heavier, layered with consequence. He considered climbing higher ground for a better view, then dismissed it. Exposure felt dangerous now. Staying low seemed wiser, even if it slowed him. As the sun climbed, the desert grew louder with life. Insects buzzed. Birds circled overhead. Normal sounds, but none of them reassured him. The marks in the sand replayed in his mind, growing more defined with each step he took away from them. He found more signs near midday. Faint impressions leading along a natural corridor between rocks. Larger than before. Clearer. He stopped at the edge, pulse racing, afraid to step closer yet unable to look away. The desert was no longer hiding what moved through it. Somewhere behind him, searchers paused over similar disturbances, exchanging uneasy looks. The pattern was beginning to form, connecting space and time in ways none of them liked. He turned away from the marks, choosing movement over certainty. Fear followed him like a shadow, stretching longer with the sun. Whatever had passed near him in the night was not gone. It had left signs, and daylight was making them impossible to ignore. The marks followed him longer than he wanted to admit. Even when he looked away, he felt their shape impressed into his thoughts, curved and heavy. He moved with new caution now, placing feet softly, pausing often, listening to the desert breathe. Daylight exposed everything, including him. Every open stretch felt like a stage, every shadow a question he could not answer. By late morning, the heat returned with authority. His skin burned, lips cracked, and the bottle was empty enough to make him afraid to look again. Thirst narrowed the world to simple needs. Shade, stillness, direction. He followed natural lines through rock and brush, choosing paths that felt traveled, though he no longer trusted feeling. A few miles away, Boots stopped abruptly along the wash. Someone crouched, fingers hovering above sand without touching it. The impressions were large, rounded, precise. Not human. Not old. They pointed parallel to the runner's last known direction. Quiet replaced radio chatter as realization spread. A predator had crossed the search area recently, close enough to matter. He saw them again near midday, clearer than before. 4 distinct shapes pressed into softer ground, edges sharp, spacing wrong for anything harmless. His stomach tightened painfully. He did not need training to recognize danger, only honesty. Something powerful moved here with purpose. He backed away slowly, heart thudding, eyes fixed on the earth as if it might rise. The word was spoken carefully among the searchers, low and controlled. Mountain lion. It changed posture, spacing, tone. They adjusted routes, eyes scanning brush lines instead of horizons. The desert felt suddenly crowded. Radios crackled with instructions meant to sound calm. Everyone knew attacks were rare, but rarity offered little comfort to someone already missing. He moved differently now, keeping his back to rock when possible, avoiding narrow passages that trapped sound. He resisted the urge to run. Running meant noise, meant weakness. He listened between steps, counting seconds of silence. Fear sharpened his senses brutally. Every scrape of stone felt loud enough to announce him. His mind betrayed him with images he could not verify. A shape behind brush. A sound following his breath. He argued with himself silently, logic versus instinct, neither winning. Survival no longer felt heroic. It felt small, animal, dependent on remaining unseen. He wondered if whatever left the tracks could hear his heart. As afternoon wore on, clouds gathered thinly, offering no rain, only shifting light. He chose a low ridge to rest briefly, scanning before settling. The tracks no longer appeared, which frightened him more than seeing them. Absence suggested proximity. Somewhere behind him, search teams traced similar paths, now aware they shared ground with something else. The sun tilted toward evening, softening the land without easing threat. He planned for night with reluctant acceptance, looking for shelter before darkness erased options. Hunger gnawed faintly, secondary to thirst and fear. He reminded himself predators avoided humans, that stillness mattered. Yet the desert had already shown how fragile assumptions were becoming. Dusk approached with a silence that felt deliberate. He chose a cluster of rocks near thicker brush, not ideal, but concealed. As he settled, a single thought repeated, steady and cold. Stay alive tonight. That was all. Somewhere, searchers adjusted their plans again, now accounting for tracks that should not have been there. Night was coming for all of them, carrying questions neither side could answer yet. The desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for movement, for sound, for weakness. He tucked himself smaller, rehearsing stillness as skill rather than fear. Somewhere beyond sight, a presence moved with confidence earned over lifetimes. He did not know it yet, but dawn would reveal truths written quietly in sand overnight. Those truths would change the search, the story, and the fragile line between hunter and survivor. As darkness settled fully, instincts ruled. The desert had spoken clearly now, leaving signs no one could afford to ignore. Tomorrow would demand decisions made under pressure, guided by fear and hope alike. For now, he waited, breathing shallow, while the night claimed its territory around him. The silence thickened, and with it the sense that he was no longer alone in the dark. Something moved beyond sight, patient and aware, as night completed its fall and the desert prepared to show its next sign. The second night pressed in heavier than the first. Darkness arrived faster, as if the desert had learned him and no longer bothered with gradual warning. He stayed tucked between rocks, muscles tight, every sense stretched thin. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and unreliable, slipping away whenever his body relaxed too much. His mind refused stillness. Thoughts rose uninvited, circling like insects around a single light. He replayed his life in pieces, moments that felt suddenly unfinished. A missed call home. A conversation postponed. He promised himself things quietly, bargains made without witnesses. If he survived the night, he would never run alone again. If morning came, he would respect limits he once ignored. Time distorted. Minutes felt endless, then vanished. At one point he was certain he heard his name carried on the wind. He lifted his head, heart racing, straining to listen. The sound did not return. He told himself it was exhaustion, dehydration, the mind searching desperately for familiarity. Still, the hope lingered, painful and bright. Cold settled deeper into his bones. He shifted slightly, wincing as cramped muscles protested. The rocks beneath him pressed hard, unforgiving. He imagined warmth, the simple comfort of a blanket, of light through a window. The contrast made his chest ache. He swallowed and forced his focus outward again. Survival demanded attention, not memory. Sometime before dawn, he drifted into a half-sleep filled with voices. They spoke calmly, reassuringly, telling him to stand, to walk, to follow. He answered them without realizing it, lips moving silently. When he startled awake, embarrassment flushed through him despite the isolation. He pressed his hands over his face, grounding himself, breathing slowly until the world steadied. With first light came a fragile sense of relief. He stretched carefully, joints stiff, head pounding. The desert emerged in muted color, deceptively calm. He scanned the ground immediately, fear guiding his eyes. New marks appeared near the rocks. Fresh, clear, closer than before. His stomach clenched. Whatever moved through the night had passed nearby again. He felt a strange, detached gratitude that he had not known it at the time. Awareness might have broken him. He stood slowly, choosing movement before panic could settle. He argued with himself as he walked. Should he stay hidden, conserve energy, wait to be found? Or move toward higher ground, risk exposure for visibility? The debate played out like two separate voices, neither fully trusted. His body decided for him, angling toward a low rise that promised a wider view. Each step felt negotiated. Just to that rock. Just a little farther. He spoke the bargains under his breath now, anchoring himself to short goals. The horizon revealed nothing helpful, only more desert unfolding endlessly. His throat burned. His tongue felt swollen. He pressed on anyway, driven by the belief that stopping meant surrender. Far away, search teams felt pressure mount. Sleep-deprived and tense, they traced tracks that intersected and disappeared, human and animal overlapping in unsettling ways. Discussions grew quieter, more focused. Time mattered. Conditions were closing in. Mid-morning heat returned quickly. His head swam. He paused in sparse shade, breathing through waves of nausea. For a moment, despair washed over him, heavy and complete. He considered lying down, letting the world fade. The thought frightened him enough to stand again. He laughed suddenly, softly, at nothing. The sound startled him. It felt wrong, unearned. He stopped, listening for response. None came. The desert absorbed it easily. As he moved on, the bargains continued. Just survive this hour. Just reach shade. Just don't fall. His mind clung to these promises, fragile but necessary. Somewhere ahead, choices waited that would demand more than hope. The desert was watching, patient as ever, and the next day would test how long his negotiations with fear could hold. By the third morning, the desert no longer felt vast. It felt close, pressing in from every direction, intimate in a way that offered no comfort. His body moved out of habit now rather than intention. Each step was slower, heavier, negotiated through pain and thirst. The bargains from the night before still echoed, but their power was fading. He woke beneath a slanted rock ledge, unsure how he had chosen it. The ground was colder there, his back stiff, his lips cracked and bleeding. When he tried to swallow, nothing happened at first. His mouth was cotton dry, unresponsive. He forced himself to breathe slowly until the dizziness eased enough to sit up. Daylight revealed new details immediately. Tracks again, faint but undeniable, cutting across his own path from the previous evening. They were closer than before, overlapping where he had walked. His pulse spiked. The realization settled brutally. Whatever had followed him knew his route better than he did. He stood, swaying, and changed direction without thought. Plans no longer mattered. Distance was meaningless. Survival narrowed to staying upright and staying aware. He kept to open ground now despite instinct, reasoning that visibility might matter more than concealment. If something was watching, at least he would see it. Far from him, the words finally reached public air. 3 days missing. Media vans gathered at the edge of dirt roads. A photograph circulated, smiling and unaware. Friends spoke into microphones with strained voices. Search coordinators expanded zones, recalculated timelines, and adjusted expectations they refused to say aloud. He climbed a shallow incline slowly, pausing every few steps. His vision tunneled, edges darkening. At the top, he dropped to one knee, gasping. The land stretched endlessly in all directions. No roads. No structures. Just desert, layered and indifferent. He felt very small within it, painfully temporary. He waved anyway, arm heavy as stone, a reflex fueled by desperation rather than logic. No one could see him, he knew that. Still, the motion mattered. It meant he was still trying. Heat bore down hard now, merciless. His skin burned, his head throbbed. He searched desperately for shade, any interruption in the open expanse. A narrow cluster of brush offered little relief, but he collapsed beneath it, chest heaving. The thought of water became obsessive, intrusive. He imagined the sound of it pouring, cool and endless. He pressed his tongue against his teeth to stop himself from crying out. Somewhere beyond the ridge, search teams paused at fresh sign. Human footprints appeared again, staggered, inconsistent. Relief flickered, tempered immediately by fear. The pattern suggested weakness, not strength. Nearby, larger tracks cut through the same area. The overlap was impossible to ignore. He forced himself upright once more. Staying still felt dangerous now, like surrender. He moved toward a distant rise, every step an argument against gravity. His legs trembled violently. He fell once, catching himself with scraped hands, then laughed weakly at the absurdity of it. Even falling took effort. The afternoon dragged. Time lost shape. He muttered to himself without realizing, fragments of encouragement, fragments of apology. When shadows lengthened, fear returned sharper than before. Another night meant another gamble. As the sun dipped low, he spotted something different ahead. Not a promise, not safety, but variation. A deeper cut in the land, a place where rock and brush thickened together. Shelter, maybe. Risk, definitely. He hesitated only briefly, then moved toward it, driven by necessity. Behind him, the desert held 3 days of his struggle in scattered signs. Ahead, night waited again, bringing with it hunger, fear, and whatever followed silently in the sand. The search was closing in, but he did not know that. All he knew was that darkness was coming, and this time it felt closer than ever. The cut in the land swallowed him as daylight drained away, rock walls rising just enough to block the wind. He moved carefully now, every step deliberate, every sound measured. The deeper shadows offered concealment, but they also stole distance and warning. His breathing sounded loud in the narrow space. He stopped often, listening, convinced the air itself was watching. Fear sharpened into focus. This place felt chosen, not accidental, as if something else already understood its purpose here now. He crouched behind a slab of stone as the last light vanished completely. Night arrived without transition, thick and immediate. The desert sounds changed, growing quieter, heavier. Somewhere nearby, something shifted. Not fast. Not careless. His muscles locked. He counted breaths, slowing them, remembering everything he had ever heard about predators and movement. Do not run. Do not panic. Stay small. Stay still. The advice echoed uselessly, because theory felt thin against reality in this moment alone with no witnesses. A sound came from the brush above him, followed by a scrape of stone. His heart slammed painfully, vision narrowing. He pressed himself flatter, willing his body to disappear. The sound repeated, closer now, deliberate. He could smell earth, dust, something musky and alive. Panic surged, then receded, replaced by cold clarity. Whatever was there knew exactly where it was. The realization felt intimate, terrifying, and final. He waited without blinking or breathing deeply in the absolute dark silence surrounding. Time fractured. Seconds stretched until they lost meaning, then collapsed suddenly. He did not see it, but he sensed movement beyond sight, weight shifting, intent measured. A low vibration passed through the ground, subtle enough to doubt, strong enough to feel. His thoughts stalled. All that existed was the space between sounds. He prepared for pain, for impact, for ending. Instead, the presence paused, then slowly moved on, leaving him shaking, alive, and silently screaming into the empty night air. He remained frozen long after it was gone, afraid movement might rewrite its decision. Muscles burned, joints screamed, but he did not shift. Survival had narrowed to obedience. Eventually, sensation returned in waves, pain sharp and grounding. He exhaled shakily, realizing he had been holding his breath. Tears came without warning, hot and humiliating. He wiped them away with trembling hands, grateful for darkness that hid weakness from the watching desert around him. Still, quiet, patient, waiting again nearby unseen. He did not sleep after that. The night dragged, heavy with expectation. Every sound threatened return. When dawn finally bled into the sky, it felt unreal, like mercy he had not earned. He checked the ground immediately. The tracks were there, clear in the early light, passing close to where he lay. Seeing them confirmed what fear already knew. He had not imagined anything. It had been real and close, far closer than safety should ever allow him again here. He stood slowly, scanning every direction, nerves raw. The encounter changed him. Fear was no longer abstract or distant. It had weight, movement, choice. He adjusted his behavior completely, avoiding confined spaces, choosing visibility over cover. Each step became calculation. He was no longer just lost. He was sharing territory. The desert felt smaller now, divided by awareness and instinct, not distance, but by survival, presence, and the quiet rules written by teeth, patience, and hunger alone tonight still ahead. As the day warmed, he forced himself to move again, driven by urgency sharper than thirst. Somewhere out there were people searching, unaware how close danger had come. He wondered if they would see the tracks before night erased them. He wondered if seeing would help or hurt. The thought followed him as he staggered forward, carrying the memory like a bruise that darkened with every step, every sound, every shadow promising return without warning, without mercy, soon again, nearby. Ahead, the land opened slightly, revealing paths that led away from the narrow cut. He chose one with shaking resolve, knowing daylight would not last forever. Behind him, the night's truth lingered in sand. Ahead, choices waited, heavy with consequence. The search was closer now, tightening slowly. But so was the danger. The next hours would decide which found him first, and whether survival would remain possible or finally slip beyond reach, claimed by desert, fear, and the unseen hunter. Morning felt fragile, as if it could break without warning. He moved through it slowly, every sense tuned outward, every muscle tight with memory. The encounter from the night before clung to him, shaping each decision. He avoided narrow spaces now, favoring open ground despite the exposure. Fear had become a guide, not a weakness. The land sloped downward into a shallow basin dotted with scrub and scattered rock. It was not a place anyone would have searched early. Too open, too empty, too far from marked trails. He followed it because it required less climbing, less effort. His body chose efficiency over strategy. Survival had stripped planning down to instinct. His steps faltered often. He stopped to steady himself, hands braced on his knees, breathing through waves of dizziness. The sun climbed quickly, heat pressing down with familiar cruelty. His skin felt tight, his vision blurred at the edges. Still, he kept moving. Stopping felt dangerous now, like giving permission to disappear. He didn't hear the voices at first. Sound reached him in fragments, broken by distance and wind. A murmur. A pause. He lifted his head, uncertain, afraid hope was playing tricks on him again. Then the sound came clearer, human and unmistakable. Voices calling, not his name, but something close enough to it. His chest tightened painfully. He tried to shout and failed, throat raw, voice reduced to a rasp. He waved both arms instead, swaying unsteadily. The motion drained what little strength he had left. He nearly collapsed before forcing himself upright again, refusing to sit, refusing to vanish at the edge of rescue. A figure appeared on the ridge above the basin, then another. Bright colors against muted land. Movement with purpose. One of them stopped suddenly, staring down. Time froze in that look, stretched thin between disbelief and recognition. Then the figure raised an arm and shouted something he couldn't hear. Relief hit him harder than fear ever had. His legs gave out without permission, folding beneath him. He sank to the ground, laughing and crying at once, sounds tearing from him uncontrollably. The desert spun, then steadied as shadows fell across him. Hands gripped his shoulders gently, firmly, grounding him in reality. Words reached him in pieces. "You're safe. We've got you." He tried to respond but could only nod weakly. Water touched his lips, carefully measured. It tasted overwhelming, almost painful. He closed his eyes, letting himself feel the moment fully, the weight of survival settling heavily into his bones. They asked simple questions. Name, pain, injuries. He answered slowly, voice cracked but present. One rescuer glanced at the ground nearby, expression shifting. The tracks were there, visible even to untrained eyes. Large, clear, close. He followed the look and nodded faintly, confirming what no one wanted to say aloud. They moved him carefully, supporting his weight, guiding him away from the basin. Radios crackled urgently, voices layered with relief and disbelief. Coordinates were shared. 3 days missing became found alive. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's story. As they climbed away from where he had been discovered, he looked back once. The basin lay quiet, unchanged, holding nothing but sand, rock, and signs that would soon be erased by wind. It struck him that survival had not happened where anyone expected. It had happened where no one looked. The desert receded slowly as they moved, but it did not release him entirely. Even as safety drew closer, his mind lingered on the night, the tracks, the presence that had passed him by. Rescue ended the search, but not the story. What he carried out with him would take far longer to leave, and some part of the desert would remain, waiting, long after he was gone. Recovery did not begin the moment he was found. It started later, in quiet rooms filled with beeping machines and soft voices, where stillness replaced danger but offered no peace. His body healed faster than his thoughts. Scratches closed, bruises faded, dehydration corrected itself. Sleep, however, remained elusive, interrupted by sudden waking and the echo of movement remembered but unseen. He answered questions carefully, repeating details until they felt distant and rehearsed. Distances, directions, decisions. Each retelling stripped emotion away, leaving facts behind like bones. When asked about fear, he hesitated. Fear had not been a moment. It had been a presence, constant and shaping, something that changed how he moved through the world. Visitors came in waves. Relief filled their faces first, then concern when they saw his eyes. He smiled when expected, grateful but disconnected. Gratitude felt complicated. Survival had not felt like victory. It felt borrowed, fragile, dependent on choices made by something else as much as himself. At night, the desert returned. Not in dreams exactly, but in sensation. Silence pressed against him. Shadows stretched too long. Ordinary sounds carried weight. He learned to breathe through it, reminding himself where he was, what was real. Still, some part of him remained under that fallen tree, counting breaths, listening. Investigators documented the area one final time before leaving it behind. Tracks photographed. Paths mapped. Conclusions carefully worded. Nature, they said, had behaved as nature does. The explanation satisfied reports, but not memory. Some truths resisted containment. Weeks later, he walked again, slowly at first, then with more confidence. He stayed close to others now, choosing routes that felt shared rather than conquered. Running no longer meant escape or control. It meant presence, awareness, respect for limits once ignored. People asked what he learned out there. He struggled to answer simply. He had learned that preparation could fail, that strength could drain quickly, that survival was not heroic, only necessary. Mostly, he learned how thin the line was between being seen and being lost. The desert remained unchanged, stretching endlessly beneath the same sun. It did not remember him, and that realization brought strange comfort. Whatever had passed him in the night continued on, indifferent and alive. The land kept no record of mercy or threat, only signs that faded with time. He carried the rest. Somewhere within him, the silence stayed. Not as fear, but as knowledge. A reminder written quietly beneath everyday life. The desert had taken days, sweat, blood, and certainty. In return, it had given survival without explanation. What it kept was invisible, buried beneath sand and wind. What it left behind walked back into the world altered, breathing, alive, and aware that some places do not need to claim you to change you forever. He did not return to the trail, but he did not avoid it either. He learned to look differently, to listen longer, to accept uncertainty without chasing control. The desert kept its silence. He kept the lesson. Between them, an understanding formed, quiet and lasting, marking the end of the search and the beginning of living forward afterward always.